Hey, howdy, hey, and welcome back to Regenerative Farming News. I'm your host, Heather Heinrichs, a former journalist turned farmer and passionate advocate for regenerative farming. I am excited to share that I'm working on something new alongside the podcast, a website where I'll be posting articles, updates, and more in-depth written content based on the interviews and stories from the podcast. Writing has always been more my forte than audio, and I can't wait to put those skills to work on the website. It'll be another way to dig deeper into regenerative practices and keep these ideas and experiences accessible for more farmers and folks interested in the movement. In today's episode, we'll do a quick harvest check-in on Alberta and Saskatchewan crops, and then I'm taking you along on a holistic farm tour I attended this week at the Tavanetz Ranch near Biggar, Saskatchewan. I had the chance to talk with several ranchers who are using rotational grazing and bale grazing, and we even got to see the results of bale grazing in person. The difference was astonishing. I'll share what we saw, the conversations that stood out, and how events like this can spark real learning and connection between farmers. And don't forget, you can keep the conversation going by following Regenerative Farming News on our social media pages. That's where I share updates, behind-the-scenes moments, extra resources, and links to every new episode. It's also the best place to connect, ask questions, and join a growing community of people who care about building healthier soils and stronger farms. Harvest has been well underway in the Canadian prairies for a few weeks now, and this week's Saskatchewan crop report shows that farmers have passed the halfway mark on harvest, sitting at about 53% complete. That's still roughly 20% behind the 5-year average, but with several years of drought, harvests have been faster than normal, and being at the halfway point in mid-September is not unusual. Also, recent rains have slowed things down even more, especially in the east and southeast of the province, where some areas saw close to 100 millimeters. The upside is that the moisture has really improved topsoil conditions, with most cropland now rated as adequate. A little too late for this year, but it's always good to have the moisture in the soil. Regionally, the Southwest is leading the way with about 2/3 of the harvest finished, while the Northeast is further behind at just over 40%. Peas, lentils, and durum are nearly wrapped up, while canola, flax, and soybeans are just getting underway. In terms of quality, peas and lentils are holding pretty close to average, but barley and durum are coming in a bit below. Farmers across the province are now hoping for a stretch of dry weather to finish combining, with the added hope that once the crop is off, more rain will continue to recharge the soil heading into next year. In Alberta, new crop estimates are out, and the results are a bit of a mixed bag. Some crops are showing real promise. Canola, corn for grain, oats, and lentils are expected to see gains this year, but others like spring wheat, durum, barley, and soybeans are either flat or slipping lower. The differences really come down to weather. Areas that caught timely rains and cooler conditions are looking at stronger yields, while drier, hotter pockets of the prairies are seeing more stress and reduced production. In Alberta, many crops were rated good to excellent through midsummer, even above the 5-year average in some regions, but concerns remain that the drier spots could still pull those averages back. In other news, I found an article online about a presentation given by a research associate from the Olds College this past July at the Ag Smart Expo. His message was, soil is not just a passive medium for plant growth, but a dynamic living ecosystem that requires careful stewardship. The research associate, Semeton Amosu, emphasized that the importance of a holistic view of soil health is, quote, a living soil responds to everything done to it, end quote, he explained, reminding us of the complexity beneath our feet. Quote, there are many things that we do that we are not even aware of with regard to the soil, And that's why we might think that we're getting a good deal in the field. But if we pay attention to our data, we may realize the soil is actually undergoing decline." End quote. One of the first steps he recommends is simply keeping the soil covered, one of the main principles of regenerative farming. As he put it, quote, "The first level where you want to keep your soil alive is to ensure that the soil is covered. If you are not growing anything, don't open it up. Cover it with grasses or stubble." End quote. That simple practice prevents erosion and helps maintain the soil's vital functions. Amosu also cautioned about the rise of new technologies like laser beams and UV lights for rapid soil testing. He noted, quote, "While technology is beautiful, we must ensure it doesn't harm beneficial soil microbes. If these tools kill the bacteria and fungi that support soil health, we may be doing more harm than good." End quote. Amosu says nutrients have to be available to the plants, and moisture, soil structure, and biological life all play critical roles in whether a crop thrives. To help farmers and agronomists make sense of all these moving parts, Amosu is developing a soil health scorecard. The idea is to evaluate the soil on physical, chemical, and biological indicators. Everything from earthworm populations and biodiversity to pH and texture. The scorecard would let producers do a quick calculation and get a rating of their soil's overall health. As he described it, quote, "It's like a medical checkup for your soil. You need to know the vital signs before you can treat any problems." End quote. The takeaway is clear. Soil health isn't one number and it isn't one practice. It's about observing, measuring, and then managing in a way that respects soil as the living, responsive ecosystem that it truly is. And in the last bit of news that I wanted to share today, I wanted to shine a spotlight on a funding option that doesn't always make the headlines, but can be a real win-win for both farmers and the environment. The program's offered by Ducks Unlimited Canada. Now, when most people think of Ducks Unlimited, they picture wetlands and waterfowl. But what many may not realize is that Ducks Unlimited Canada has built a whole suite of agricultural programs designed specifically for farmers across the prairies and beyond. And yes, these programs often come with financial incentives. So how does it work? One of the best known options is the Marginal Areas program. If you've got acres that are constantly giving you trouble, maybe saline ground, low spots that drown out in a wet year, or just patches that never seem to yield, it can make more sense to seed those to perennial forage. Ducks Unlimited helps cover the cost of establishing that forage, and in some provinces, they'll even provide a per-acre payment. You save yourself the headache of farming those acres, your cattle get extra feed or feed to sell, and the land itself starts to heal. Beyond that, there are regional programs that vary from province to province. In places like Alberta or Manitoba, DUC has worked with farmers to cost share fencing, watering systems, or grazing infrastructure when it ties into protecting wetlands or setting up better grazing management. There are also conservation agreements, which are voluntary contracts where a farmer commits to keeping a wetland or forage stand intact, and in exchange, they get financial support and recognition. So, what's required from farmers to take part? First, these programs are voluntary. You choose what fits your operation. The key is being willing to set aside those marginal acres, maintain the perennial cover, or agree to certain management practices that line up with conservation goals. Typically, there's a bit of paperwork and a site visit with a Ducks Unlimited specialist, and then the support kicks in, whether that's cost-sharing seed, covering infrastructure, or providing a per-acre payment. The bigger picture here is that these programs give farmers a way to lower costs on problem acres, strengthen their grazing base, and at the same time contribute to healthier soils, cleaner water, and more resilient landscapes. If you're curious, check out ag.ducks.ca to see what's available in your region. These offerings change depending on the province, but the common thread is this: practical support for farmers who want to make their land work better for both production and the environment. For the main story this week, I want to take you along to a ranch tour that I just attended at the Tavanetz Ranch near Biggar, Saskatchewan. It was a holistic management field trip put together by Public Pastures Public Interest and the National Farmers Union. I actually only came across the event posting late on Friday, so I didn't get a chance to share it with you ahead of time. But I knew I had to go, and I'm so glad I did. At the Tavanetz Ranch tour, there was a real mix of people in attendance: students and professors from the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan, a community pasture manager, and several ranchers from across the area, and of course, one podcast host. The ranch itself is operated by Dean and his wife Rita, though they've largely handed the reins over to their children and their spouses. That generational transition adds another layer to the story. The practices being put in place today are setting up the next generation to succeed. Both Dean and his son Jesse were excited to give the tour of their farm and talk about how they are using regenerative practices. We started out by touring their co-op pasture, where they graze multiple herds together. It's similar to the way a community pasture operates, but instead of being community organized, this one is family run. It was a great example of how families can pool resources and manage larger areas of grass collectively. They can't do intensive rotational grazing in the co-op pasture yet because of a lack of water, but they are hoping to remedy that with GPS e-collars possibly next year. Jesse Tavanetz told me that he's hoping the e-collars could potentially allow them to give the cattle access back to the existing water sites without having to put in expensive infrastructure to move water around the pasture. And in the pastures where they are doing more moving and more rotational grazing, it would allow them to do that with a lot less work. With the GPS-enabled collars, Dean explained they could set virtual boundaries from a phone or computer and shift cattle with the push of a button. In his words, quote, "If we could apply it here, we could double or triple our grass production," end quote. For him, it's not just about saving time, it's about unlocking the ability to manage grazing at a scale and precision that simply isn't possible with traditional fencing, especially in areas where fencing is much more difficult, with forests and trees. After a tour around the pasture, our host guided us out to the fields where bale grazing had been done, and the results spoke for themselves. Every 20 feet or so, another circle of lush, deep green grass stood out against the lighter forage around it. Those were the places where the bales had been grazed the winter before, and the response from the soil was just astonishing. You could pick out those circles across the whole pasture like a patchwork quilt of fertility. This was my first time seeing these kinds of results in real life. I have seen many videos and pictures posted on Facebook groups and around on the internet of ranchers accomplishing these kind of results with winter bale grazing, but it still was so incredible to see it with my own two eyes. On the tour with me was Rod and Val Petrie, ranchers from Tessier, Saskatchewan, explaining how they've also been managing their land in similar ways. Quote, "We've cross-fenced a lot. We don't practice extreme rotational grazing like some other people, but we do move our cattle about every 3 to 5 days," Rod said. They noted that some ranchers are moving their cattle every 12 hours and admitted it's a big time commitment. The Petries have also done bale grazing for many years. And they emphasized that you need to be prepared. Quote, "You have to have a backup plan," end quote. But the payoff is clear. They say the growth is very noticeable. The Petries even noted that in one particular spot, they could still see the difference even a decade later on the spots where the bales were grazed and being more noticeably productive. Like many ranchers, they have had to downsize their herd during the last several years of drought. But when the rains finally came this year, Val said, quote, "Things just exploded." The Petries told me that for them, the key is the concentration of nutrients and litter coverage that the bale grazing leaves behind, and, as they put it, quote, "paying attention to what's under the ground as opposed to only what's above." Dean Tavanetz himself talked about the bigger picture. Quote, "Holistic management gives you a sense of direction. It's like having a North Star," he said. He's fascinated by nature and especially focused on preserving native prairie grassland. Quote, "Biodiversity and complexity, that's what makes life possible." End quote. Also in attendance were Philip and Lorraine Griebel, a couple grazing a small herd of 30 head on rented pastures. They use rotational grazing and put a lot of emphasis on low-stress cattle handling. Philip said, quote, "It's not a full-time living for us. It's about raising as much of our own meat as possible," end quote. They butcher their own meat chickens, keep laying hens, and market their beef directly to customers by highlighting that their cattle live a low-stress life, from low-stress weaning right through to on-farm butchering. What really struck me about the day was how many different perspectives and scales of operations came together around the same themes: soil health, grazing management, and finding ways to build resilience. And of all the things we saw, the circles of grass from bale grazing stood out the most. To me, it was living proof that practices, which might look messy in the short term, can add up to healthier soils, stronger pastures, and more options for ranchers over the long haul. The core message I found for anyone raising livestock and looking to increase their grass production was this: don't be afraid to let your animals leave some of your bales trampled into the ground. That investment of organic material into your soil is going to come right back to you with a lot of interest very quickly. And it makes me wonder, when I see an old stack of bales in a yard, if those bales could be put to great use in a pasture somewhere with winter bale grazing. All of that aging organic matter could be put to work in rejuvenating next year's grass and boosting production for years to come. Also, I did a quick little phone interview with Dean Tavanetz, and here is the bale grazing in his own words.
Well, the bale grazing is, a way to cut your winter feeding costs. And, we've eliminated corral cleaning costs. And, the cattle are putting the nutrients back on the land in our situation where the hay has come from. So we're quite fortunate that way. It's not just going any part of the ranch, but we're recycling it back to where the nutrients come from. And, lower feed costs, machinery costs. I mean, we all know no matter what we do, everything's tied to fossil fuels, and the costs are just, you have to become a low-cost operator, and it's really giving us direction that way. And labor, the labor is so much less that we used to feed every day. It's the drudgery of routine. I mean, there's no days off. It's cows don't know it's Christmas sort of thing.
And how often are you out? Like,
right.
You have to move the fence. So how
Yeah,
often do you have to go out there?
we moved it. Yeah, every 5 to 7 days. It can vary on the weather. If it's colder weather, the cows will eat more. So it may be 5 days. If it's warmer weather, and as you move into the bale grazing, sometimes as they're going back, they'll, clean up a little bit of stuff that they maybe didn't on some of the previous rows. But generally it's 5 to 7 days. It's not a chiseled in stone 5 days and that's it, from the time we leave home, come out here, it's let's say an hour, and when we're not rushing at it, we're kind of biding our time, observing the cows, just kind of enjoying the day,
Yeah.
unless it's really cold or something. But it's just a pleasure to be out there, and sometimes you hear the coyotes howl or whatever, see some deer, some wildlife. It doesn't feel like work, so to speak. Some land we recently purchased, so there was a lot of fencing and water infrastructure, so we're not into the rotation or the movements as often as we'd like. Sometimes we do use the turbo wire temporary fencing. Where we were yesterday, the cows just moved there a week ago, so the grass is quite mature. It's not really actively growing, so we're not concerned with them taking that second bite of regrowth.
Right.
They're going to harvest what's there. But with using, temporary fencing, we calve on grass, but we have had up to 14 moves throughout the summer grazing season.
Wow.
And and then at the co-op pasture, well, they generally go there after the middle of June and out by, give or take approximately middle of October. But that's where, some of the interest in the virtual fencing is coming into play. We think when we also rent some land, and you don't want to put a lot of infrastructure into rented land, so that's where some of the virtual fencing we feel really can be a benefit to manage the grazing on land that you don't own.
Right. Yes, that's right. We had talked about your interest in e-collars. You're looking into hopefully getting some funding for them, but of course, that's always questionable until you actually get approved for it. But either
Right.
way, yeah, you're really looking into these e-collars. And that's because on that piece of land, like you were just saying, you don't own that land, it's lease land from government property. So
Right.
you don't want to invest in the infrastructure to put fences there. And the e-collars could really solve that for you.
That's right. And not only that, as you manage the grazing, you're improving the land. So then in return, you're increasing your carrying capacity. So, you have to pencil that into the equation of the cost too.
It's not often that you hear a rancher describe winter feeding as it doesn't feel like work. It was quite an excellent opportunity, and I was so grateful to get to go and tour the Tavanetz farm. And in case you're new to the podcast and you haven't heard previous episodes, a quick reminder of upcoming events. First, the Manitoba Forage and Grassland Association's Regenerative Agriculture Conference is happening on November 12th and 13th in Brandon, Manitoba. The theme this year is Enriching Land, Lives, and Livelihoods. This conference will feature an incredible lineup of keynote speakers. Rick Clark, a fifth-generation farmer from Indiana and a leader in large-scale regenerative practices. Michael Ferguson from Melfort, Saskatchewan. Rob Wonder of Foam Lake, Saskatchewan, Kimberly Cornish of the Food Water Wellness Foundation, and Tom Krawick, a researcher and author known for making ranching practices more accessible and practical. Add in breakout sessions and a bustling trade show and even a free kids program, and this will be a must-attend event. Then looking ahead to the new year, Holistic Management Canada is hosting its annual conference February 6th through 8th in Taber, Alberta. This gathering is family-friendly and brings together farmers, ranchers, and land managers of all ages to share tools for holistic decision-making, grazing strategies, soil health, and community building. Although the speaker lineup is not yet up on the website, last year's featured keynote was none other than Gabe Brown, the North Dakota rancher whose story has inspired thousands around the world to adopt regenerative practices. These conferences are an incredible way to recharge, network, and bring fresh ideas back to your farm. If you can make it to Brandon, Manitoba in November or Taber, Alberta in February, you'll be surrounded by people who are passionate about regenerative agriculture and eager to share their knowledge. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Regenerative Farming News. From the harvest updates across the prairies, to soil health research at Olds College and Ducks Unlimited programs, and finally the inspiring tour at Tavanetz Ranch. I hope you found some ideas that you can take back to your own farm or ranch. What stood out for me the most was seeing bale grazing in action. Those circles of grass were proof that simple management changes can transform both soil and forage production, and even make your winter feeding not feel like work. Add in the voices of ranchers like the Petries, the Griebel family, and Dean and Rita Tavanetz, and it's clear that regenerative practices aren't just theory. They're happening here and now on the prairie. Remember, I'll soon be launching a new website where I'll share more written content, articles, and reflections on the stories. Writing is my first love, and I'm excited to add that as another way for you to follow along. In the meantime, don't forget to follow Regenerative Farming News on social media for updates. Together, we can grow healthier soil, stronger farms, and a more resilient future.